consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, we have a housing crisis in this country. People are struggling to afford rent, and many can't even think of buying a house. Basic housing is an economic and human right. Here are 5 things we must do. First, we need 7 million new housing units to fill the gap and a $445 billion investment in the Housing Trust Fund. Second, we need to pass my Stop Wall Street Act to prevent Wall Street from buying single-family homes. Third, we need to provide down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers. Fourth, we need to pass Representative Cori Bush's protection for tenants and financial assistance before they get evicted. And finally, we need to provide grants for neighborhood stabilization like the Culinary Union did so rent doesn't increase beyond inflation. We need to address the housing crisis.
Mr. Khanna from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Homan, you have said that you plan to lead the largest mass deportation operation in history. Is that your aspiration?
The largest illegal immigration crisis on the border is going to have to result in the largest deportation operation because most of them will get order removal.
I'm just using your words. You stand by that?
Yes, absolutely.
What is that? Does that mean that you're telling the American public, I'm just trying to understand, if they're 10, 11, 12 million undocumented, I don't know, how many do you think that any one of those folks, if you're in charge, is going to face potential deportation?
I think if you're in the country illegally, you need to be concerned because you're in the country legally.
So you're telling basically any American today, or any undocumented person here today, 11 million, that your goal, if you get power again, is you're going to lead the largest mass deportation of all of them, correct?
The biggest illegal alien crisis on the southern border. Millions of people crossing. No, you got to put it in perspective. If you believe in due process and have the right to claim asylum, they have the right to due process and see a court, when those final orders are issued, if they're not executed, then what the hell are we doing?
I just want people to know what happens if you come into power. You've been pretty candid about it, and
yes.
So I think it's important for people to understand. Now, I assume that you reject this great replacement theory, correct?
The numbers are the numbers. So
no, this conspiracy theory of great replacement, that somehow there's an intentional effort to replace white Americans with Americans who look like me. You reject that theory, correct?
yes, I don't think it's about replacement.
Mr. Edlow, do you clearly reject the great replacement theory?
Yes, that's not what this is about.
Would you reject Charlie Kirk, who has said that the great replacement theory is something that more Republicans should embrace? Would you reject his characterization?
I'm not aware of his characterization.
If he's advocating for the great replacement
I can only speak to myself. I'm not.
Would you reject any person who advocates for the great replacement theory?
I'm not.
Mr. Homan, would you reject Charlie Kirk's?
I don't know what his intention is. I mean,
would you commit to not going on the Charlie Kirk show again if he's advocating the great replacement theory? And what Charlie Kirk has said is that he was pleased that Vivek Ramaswamy finally talked about the great replacement theory on the campaign trail. And the great replacement theory is basically that there's some intentional idea of replacing white Americans with brown and black Americans for additional votes, or the diluting of America. You've rejected that.
I would have to have a discussion with Charlie Kirk and find out what he means by what he says.
But you reject the theory, correct?
It depends what his meaning of his theory is. What does he mean by that? I read stuff in the media every day about me that's not true.
What is it that you would think is a reasonable view of it?
Again, I don't think what's happening is replacing white Americans. I think it's bringing in a large group of people who the left thinks will be future Democratic voters, or going to change them out with the census numbers, going to change the seats in the House and all that's done. But I'd have to talk to Mr. Kirk and find out what his views are and what he means by it.
You believe there's an intentional effort by who to try to get more Democratic voters? I mean, what is it that your belief is?
I've been asked why I think they support open borders and bringing millions of people, and I, as I specified earlier, you were not here, I don't understand why anybody would want to unsecure a border. I don't see any downside in a secure border. So there has to be some sort of political...
the last question on this is that just your speculation, or do you have any, I mean, that's a very serious charge to launch on.
It's just one option out of many. Do I have direct evidence it's happening?
And who do you
No.
think is doing it? The Democratic Party operatives or other people? I mean, who's leading this, in your view?
You know what? I think you need to ask the administration, why did you open the border and why do you want millions of people crossing the border and be released in the United States? That's a question for them.
Mr. Byer, do you have any sense that this administration doesn't believe in secure borders? And what would be the top 3 policies that you would implement to secure the border?
Well, first of all, this administration is removing record numbers of people, and in fact, a higher percentage of people who cross the border than were removed in 2019 and 2020. So the idea that they have no interest in this, they don't want to remove people. I mean, if they did that, why do they have cages? Why do they have all the things that you've talked about? It's logistical issues. Congress has funded 34,000 beds, and that's how many people arrive in 4 days at the border. That's why people are being released. The solution to this is legal immigration. We need to resolve how we want people to come to this country. Have a conversation about that. And once we agree that people are good, immigrants contribute to this country, then we can have a conversation about how should they come? What's the way? What's the mechanism? Because right now there isn't any for the people who are showing up at our border.
Thank you, Myra. I appreciate Crystal Spain very much, and Jay Parmerly. I said the only gripe I have with Crystal is who asked you to speak after the President of the United States and Mr. Jim Clyburn? But I want to start not just by recognizing my colleagues, Honorable Marcia Fudge and Joyce Beatty, but making one thing clear as a progressive Democrat to some of the young people who have such passion and idealism and spoke up. President Joe Biden represents the best chance for peace in the Middle East and for 2 states living in justice. Now, Representative Clyburn took my whole speech about talking about all of the accomplishments of Joe Biden, and I'm not going to go through that list again, but I do want to emphasize his point about student loans, because you heard him. $138 billion of student loans forgiven, $7 billion to HBCUs, the largest investment of any modern president, 3.7 million students who have been better off because of this president. And this president had to partner with our leader, Leader Clyburn. I see Mignon and Jennifer here, but Leader Clyburn delivers for South Carolina, but I've got to tell you something else about him. There is only one person in the Congress, I've been there about 8 years, who can get other members of Congress to stop talking. Usually you get up members of Congress up, it's sort of like this room. I mean, I appreciate the attention, but a lot of times people are talking. When Jim Clyburn speaks, there's pin drop silence. Even when he's going on about Tocqueville, there's pin drop silence. Pin drop silence. Because he understands history. And he has a respect, not just by the Democrats, but the entire Congress. And I was coming here to South Carolina, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if more people listened to history? You see, maybe, just maybe, if your former governor, Nikki Haley, had listened to some history, she'd be more open about sharing her story. See, as an Indian American, my father came here in the late 1960s, around when Nikki Haley's father came here. And you know what? Before 1965, it would have been very unlikely for either Nikki Haley's father or my father to be allowed in this country, because this country didn't let in Indian immigrants, Chinese immigrants, or for that matter, Asian immigrants. It is because people like Jim Clyburn were in jail. It is because people like Eleanor Norton organized the March on Washington. It is because John Lewis was beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge that this country passed the 1965 Immigration Act that allowed Nikki Haley and my parents to come to America. It is because of people like Mr. Clyburn, Mr. Lewis, Ms. Norton, that I can stand on this stage as a congressman, and that Nikki Haley can pursue the highest office of the land. Let us not forget history. You see, history is personal to me because my grandfather, Amarnath Vidyalankar, spent 4 years in jail alongside Gandhi in India's independence movement. Gandhi's movement for satyagraha, of nonviolent active resistance in the pursuit of truth, inspired Rustin, it inspired Lawson, and inspired Dr. King, who had the Bible and the Gandhi reader wherever he went. And let this be clear. The civil rights movement did not just open doors for Black Americans, it opened doors for every person of color in America. Why dwell on the history? You know, by the way, when my parents and Nikki Haley and the Indian American parents came here, they couldn't get hired at Harvard or Stanford or Yale. Guess who hired them? The HBCUs. That's why you got so many Indian faculty working there. Now, let me tell you why, and then I get to the core of my point about the president, but let me tell you why history matters, because if you don't understand history, you can't make progress about the future. If you don't understand the moral debt that we have, the profound moral debt to the civil rights movement, then you can't understand your obligations and duties going forward. I feel the weight of that debt representing Silicon Valley. $10 trillion of wealth in my district. Apple, Google, Intel, NVIDIA, OpenAI. And you know what the truth is? There are a lot of Indian Americans now who have become technology leaders, but there are too few Black and Latino Americans who are participating in modern wealth generation. Here's the truth. You cannot overcome the racial wealth gap if you don't overcome the racial wealth generation gap. Black Americans were excluded from the agriculture revolution, excluded from the Industrial Revolution. Shame on us if we exclude Black Americans from the digital revolution. And that is why I reached out, and Representative Clyburn reached out, and Jennifer and Mignon, to start to do something about it. And we made an investment in technology in this state of South Carolina because of Jennifer and Mignon and Representative Clyburn's leadership. At Claflin, we have Zoom that has started to invest in students and hiring young people to have jobs that are high-paying jobs in technology. We partnered with Benedict and Google to provide a $5,000 scholarship to start to create jobs for folks in new industry and in new technology. And I was talking to Senator Rob this evening, and he said you've got to have a living wage in the technical schools at these places to attract individuals. Now, I know that we are passionate, and this president has been passionate about voting rights. And I know we are passionate, and this president led and the House delivered on civil rights and police violence. But we also need to be passionate about economic rights and economic empowerment. Dr. King had a new economic Bill of Rights in 1968. And that is why I believe when President Biden is reelected in his 4 years, in the first year there should be a goal. 100,000 new Black Americans credentialed in high technology jobs, in high paying jobs, and 10,000 Black startups funded. Silicon Valley can do that. The corporate CEOs can do that. They have the wealth, and the talent is here. So much talent here in Atlanta, in the South. And we should have another goal, that the big government and big technology should start contracting with black-owned law firms, with black-owned consulting firms, with black-owned service firms. That's the 21st century version of what Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta. Why can't we do that in the new digital economy? Let me end with saying why I think this is so important and why President Biden, in already having delivered for HBCUs and student loans, I know will deliver in bringing people technology, opportunity, and wealth. You see, by lifting up the black community or Latino community, we lift up America. If an Asian American young person in my district reaches out and starts to work with white and Latino Americans in rural America or factory towns, and young black Americans brimming with ambition in the South to build new technology, to build new industry, to build new companies, to build new wealth, then just maybe we can start to overcome the division and hate and anger in America. That was Frederick Douglass's vision in one of the greatest speeches ever given in American history. In 1869, when Frederick Douglass, enslaved for 20 years, stands up not for black Americans, but for Chinese Americans, for the right of Chinese Americans to immigrate. And Douglass prophesizes that one day America will be a nation of all nations, a composite nation with people from every part of the world. If we provide economic opportunity and economic hope to people who have been shut out of the modern economy, if we provide young people with real pathways to prosperity, then I believe we can achieve Douglass's vision of a cohesive multiracial democracy with dignity for all. My friends, that work starts in South Carolina, the nation's first primary, and with re-electing Joe Biden as President of the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Panetta and Secretary Pompeo, for your service to our country. As you know, we hollowed out a lot of our manufacturing in this country, and a lot of it went to China. China has a massive trade deficit. We still have a massive trade deficit with China, and China has trade surpluses with Japan, with South Korea, with India, engaged in unfair economic competition. Would you think it's reasonable for the United States to explicitly have a goal to try to reduce the trade deficit with China by 10% every year, or some metric, so that we can rebalance the relationship?
I think it is very important for the United States to be able to develop industry, manufacturing, develop those products that are important, particularly to our national security. And you're right, we've hollowed out that capability over the last few years. We need to be able to make clear that we are going to develop the kind of security that we need. And yeah, I think limits make sense as part of that package of developing our own capabilities and manufacturing and industry.
Secretary Pompeo?
Yeah, I'd add, seems largely right. I'd add only this. We should begin the focus on things that really matter as opposed to trade more generally. I'm happy to think our way through that, but the initial problem set is at the dual-use technologies, AI, all of the places where the next generation of American manufacturing will actually evolve from, right? The manufacturer, I ran a machine shop in Wichita, Kansas, probably the only Secretary of State with that in his background of even for the next 250 years. In the end, we ran machines, we were good, but in the end it was technology innovation and the intellectual property against which we were building those manufactured goods, which were most important to the workforce and my capacity to grow my business. And I think that's true today. We ought to make sure we protect those things. And we can get that right as a policy matter pretty pretty straightforward, and I've watched as you all have tried to tackle that, and I hope you all can make even more progress there.
One of the things that I'm working on a bipartisan basis is seeing how we can have steel, and clean steel in particular, returned to the United States. I mean, hollowed out in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Warren, Ohio, Downriver, Michigan. Keith Crotch, who worked for you, Secretary Pompeo, was one of the originators of the Chips and Science Act. I mean, that I give him credit, even as we worked with Todd Young and Chairman Gallagher was in an earlier part on the Endless Frontiers. And we did that for chips. Can we do that for steel, which is to say the next generation of steel, which is going to be direct reduction impact in Toledo or hydrogen? Why can't we lead in something like that and have the government partner with the Cleveland Cliffs on an issue like that, like we did for chips? I mean, we went from the largest exporter of steel. Now 9 out of the 15 biggest steel companies are in China. So one, would you support a chips-like approach to new modern steel plants in the United States? And second, if you could just add, since then I'll give you the rest of the time, I don't understand how we're even thinking of letting Nippon Steel buy U.S. steel. I mean, Japan would never let us buy one of their steel plants. I mean, why is this even a question?
I guess I'll start with the second one and then the first one. I actually encourage foreign direct investment in the United States. I think it's incredibly important. It has created thousands and thousands of jobs in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. Foreign companies who say, Japanese, European companies who want to come invest in America and create jobs. South Koreans now investing enormous amounts of money in Texas to build semiconductor fab. I think we should be enormously supportive of foreign direct investment when it wants to come here on American terms, and these are our friends and allies. Second, I did support the Chips and Science Act. It was with a touch of reluctance in my heart, but it was between Secretary Ross and myself and our two teams. And by the way, Secretary Raimondo has been fantastic on this. I credit the Biden administration for this. This was a set of technologies that mattered, and we had none of it here at home. I think that's the quintessential model for when someone needs to use American taxpayer dollars as a form of industrial policy. I think we need to be very careful about how and when we do that. And I prefer competition as the model, but when the competition is unfair and capital markets won't support an important technology for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, then I think we can do that. And if someone could make the case that steel were so, I'd support it. I wonder if those industrial metals don't end up, if you put a tariff on them or a tax on them, if it doesn't end up costing the American industry more than it gains them.
Gentlemen's time expired. We have 4 minutes to do Molinar, Whitman, and Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, could you assure the American public today that no nonviolent protester about a ceasefire of the Middle East will be investigated or surveilled by the FBI?
We are not going to be investigating nonviolent First Amendment activity.
And could you just assure, whatever their position is on the Middle East or the 2024 election, if there is an American who's out there engaged in expressing their view, whether that is for a ceasefire or whatever that is, the FBI is not going to be investigating them or surveilling them, correct?
Our mission is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution, and we intend to do both. We embrace both parts of that mission. In our view, it doesn't matter what you're ticked off about or who you're ticked off at. There's a right way under the First Amendment to exercise those views, and we're going to help protect that. And there's a wrong way to exercise those views, and that's violence and threats, and we are going to investigate that.
I appreciate your saying that because I think I share your view that the First Amendment and peaceful protest is at the heart of our democracy. I also have appreciated some of your views on making sure that as we appropriately investigate Chinese threats to infrastructure and the Chinese Communist Party's threats and deal with the cybersecurity, you've been very clear that you do not think that that should involve the profiling of Chinese Americans, and I think you've been sensitive in some remarks you made at University of Michigan about how in the past that has happened. Can you speak to some of the past history of profiling of Asian Americans and how under your leadership you're going to make sure that that doesn't happen as we appropriately investigate Chinese Communist Party threats to the United States?
We are going to aggressively pursue the threat posed by the CCP with investigations that are predicated on the facts and the law and our policies. And they're not going to be based on race, ethnicity, or national origin, and they haven't been. Now, it is the case that the Chinese government aggressively targets individuals here to enlist them in their efforts, but they also aggressively suppress and coerce and harass Chinese Americans and Chinese visitors here. And so we view as part of our role to help protect those people. And so part of the key is drawing the distinction in between the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, the malicious actor, and Chinese Americans, Chinese dissidents, the victims.
And as you do this, Director, and like I said, I think under your leadership, from your public comments, you've been quite good about drawing that distinction. But do you bring to it a historical awareness that Asian Americans in this country have been profiled in our history, just like I'm sure you have a historical awareness of the FBI's role during the Civil Rights Movement?
Certainly, there have been abuses or mistakes in the past, and we're determined to make sure that those things don't happen again. But I do want to make clear that our work, at least since I've been director, focused on Chinese aggression, is based on the facts and the law and proper predication.
And you can assure sort of Chinese Americans that they aren't being profiled or targeted in any way based on their ethnicity or race?
We are not going to open investigations based on profiling people for race, ethnicity, or national origin or anything of that sort.
Thank you. I'm done with my question.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will vote no today on the $17 billion aid package which provides a blank check to Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and the extreme right-wing government in Israel. How dare Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, have the gall to criticize America while calling for the mass expulsion of Palestinians? I will vote no because this bill includes zero humanitarian aid while children are dying and 400,000 Gazans face famine. I will vote no because this bill undermines human rights and international law, ignoring the recent ICJ decision calling on Israel to do more to protect Palestinian civilians. I will vote no because it is painfully obvious to the entire world that what is needed today is a permanent ceasefire and a release of all hostages. There come moments in a nation's history when our actions reveal our values. This is such a moment. We must stand for stopping the bombing, for ending this brutal war, and for justice in the Middle East with a Palestinian state with equal rights living side by side with Israel.
Gentleman from Connecticut reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Well, I'm pleased to follow my great home state senator, Senator Padilla from California. I want to really thank Representative Ocasio-Cortez for her vision and boldness, and Senator Markey for his guts and courage in introducing the Green New Deal. I also want to recognize Senator Wyden for his brilliant leadership on the Inflation Reduction Act. Look, the Green New Deal was about more than just the climate and jobs. In my view, it gave this country a sense of common purpose again. I remember when my parents came to the United States in the 1960s. There was a sense that this country could do big things. John F. Kennedy had said we were going to go to the moon. And there were skeptics. There were people who said it would cost too much, but this country had the vision to get that done. And by the way, that's what led to the purchase of microprocessors that spawned the entire Silicon Valley. Would not have happened if we had not gone to the moon. Silicon Valley would not have happened. And this same idea for the Green New Deal that Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey have put forward, I believe will inspire this country again to do big things with the grassroots activists like Climate Defiance and Sunrise and Gen Z for Change, and with private industry and with government. It is one of the most proud initiatives that I've been part of, and I thank them again for leading it.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you. Next, Senator Dick Blumenthal.
Mr. Khanna. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, about how many Palestinian women and children have been killed by Israel since October 7th?
It's over 25,000. Mr. Secretary, last week, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights warned that any transfer of weapon or ammunition to Israel violates international law. About how many precision-guided munitions has the United States given Israel since the beginning of the war?
I don't have that number at my fingertips, but we have endeavored
Mr. Secretary, it's about 21,000 precision-guided munitions to Israel since the start of the war. Secretary Austin, last week you spoke to Defense Minister Gallant, and you said clearly there needs to be a plan to ensure the safety and support of those sheltering in Rafa before any military operations proceed. National Security Advisor Sullivan has said he has not seen any plan yet. John Kirby said it would be a disaster to invade Rafa. If Netanyahu defies the United States and invades Rafa, will you commit today that you will halt any future military sales to Israel?
obviously, sir, that's a presidential decision, but you know, we expect that. And by the way, I spoke to Minister Gallant last night, and I expect that when we provide munitions to allies and partners, that they'll use them in a responsible way.
But would you make a commitment that they defy what we're saying and they violate international law, by the way, which is opposed to National Security Memorandum 18 and National Security Memorandum 20, that if they don't do what we're saying, that we would halt those arms sales or transfers?
Again, the decision to halt the provision of security assistance would not be mine. It would be. What
would you recommend?
Well, I certainly, again, I really do expect that that they utilize the weapons that we provide them in a responsible way, and then if they don't,
I just want to, for time purposes, it seems to me if they're defying what you're telling them, what Kirby's telling them, what Sullivan's telling them, that wouldn't be responsible. Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Program, has said that the Palestinian children are starving. Extremist settler Stomrich, Israel's finance minister, stopped American flour, which our taxpayers paid for to get into Gaza. If Israel again ever stops American-paid aid from getting into Gaza, will you commit to not sending future arms sales?
Again, that's not my decision. I would, number one, do what I've been doing and engage the leadership and encourage them to ensure that humanitarian assistance is getting.
Mr. Secretary, I would just say, and I have one more question, that we need some consequences when another country is defying you, defying the National Security Advisor, defying the President, defying National Security Memorandum 20. There has to be some consequence. And then I was surprised John Kirby said that Israel is taking more precautions than the U.S. military would to protect civilian life. Mr. Austin, Secretary Austin, isn't that statement inaccurate given Israel has used hundreds of 22,000-pound dumb bombs when there were no place for civilians to go? Would the U.S. government ever target terrorists with 2,000-pound bombs in a densely populated area?
Well, I mean, it depends on the situation, and again.
But have we done that? Use 45% of bombs that are unguided or a 2,000-pound bomb? I mean, do you really think that the Israeli government military is taking more precautions than the United States military would?
I think, you know, just based upon the results in terms of the significant loss of life.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Gallagher.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, it is time that we have a real solution for having high-skilled immigrants help with our national security. That is why I, as a co-sponsor of the EAGLE Act, am going to introduce it and attach it to the National Defense Authorization. The reality is we need immigrants to help build some of the critical technology that is going to keep us ahead of China and keep our military strong and our industrial base strong. The EAGLE Act benefits all American workers by lifting the arbitrary per-country green card cap to bring down the decades-long backlog. It also will help end H-1B abuse by foreign outsourcing corporations as these visas undercut wages. It is time to pass the EAGLE Act and attach it to national defense and make it a national security issue. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Very good. Chair now recognizes Mr. Khanna for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Parnas, can you tell me about your meetings with Dmitry Firtash and why you believe the Trump campaign used his services?
Yes, well, I was sent to meet with Dmitry Firtash because Dmitry Firtash had resources. He's an oligarch that was in Vienna waiting to be extradited to the United States, but he was very close with Vladimir Putin, Ukraine, and lots of characters in that part of the world. And my objective at the time was to have him help us lean on Mykola Zlochevsky and get dirt on the Bidens.
And what type of dirt were you trying to get?
We were searching for Hunter's hard drive that we were told was out there. We were searching for bank records to validate certain bank records that was given to me, Hunter's personal bank records that was given to me by John Solomon that he said he got from the FBI to validate certain payments that were going for car purchases. But the objective was to try to find a link from any of the payments that would go into Joe Biden's account.
And who told you to get this dirt?
Well, who told me? Rudy Giuliani.
Anyone else that you remember?
John Solomon. I mean, everybody that was part of the team. I mean,
did Bill Barr know that you were involved in getting this dirt?
Absolutely. Bill Barr was notified of our investigation from the day he took office.
Did you ever have a conversation with Bill Barr of being lenient towards Dmitry in his role, in Bill Barr's role as Attorney General?
I personally did not, but I was witness to Victoria Tunzing and Joe DeGeneva having a conversation with Bill Barr about Dmitry Firtash.
What did they say to Bill Barr?
Basically, they were telling him that the charges were false and that he needs to drop the charges and basically end the case.
And why did they tell him to drop the charges on this Russian oligarch?
Because Dmitry Firtash was going to help us getting dirt on the Bidens or whatever else the Trump campaign needed.
So my understanding is you have the Trump campaign telling you to talk to a Russian oligarch to get dirt on the President of the United States for political reasons, and then someone from the Trump campaign is talking to the Attorney General to drop the charges because this foreign national is helping get dirt on a political candidate?
Absolutely.
Did Bill Barr indicate any willingness to drop the charges?
After a meeting that Victoria Tunzing and Joe DeGeneva had with DOJ, they came back and informed me that we're going to Vienna because to tell Dmitry Firtash everything's going to be okay.
Do you know if Bill Barr in any way told you to say that?
I was not privy to in that meeting, no.
Do you have any evidence that Bill Barr would have indicated to signal to Dmitry that the charges would be dropped?
Only from conversations from Rudy Giuliani or Victoria Tunzing.
And what did they say about what Bill Barr said?
They basically told me that this would be taken care of as long as Firtash played ball, and that's the message they relayed to me to tell Firtash.
And they said that Bill Barr was conveying that to them directly?
Yes, after meetings. There were several meetings. There was a private meeting at where Rudy Giuliani went and bumped into actually Bill Barr at the Trump International Hotel, and he used that as a moment to take him aside, speak to him. And then there were certain official meetings through official channels where Victoria Tunzing met with him. So, yes.
Do you know anything, if anything was done with the charges?
Till this day, Dmitry Firtash is not here.
Do you believe that Bill Barr should be investigated for his conduct in potentially dropping these charges?
I absolutely believe that, but not only that, I believe Bill Barr should be investigated into the cover-up and trying to silence me to get the truth out of what really happened in Ukraine.
And explain the cover-up and what you believe he should be investigated with your last minute.
My arrest was set up strictly to shut me up, to seal my documents, take away all my information, and turn me into a crazy man that had no way to prove what was going on. But the real story was Bill Barr was trying to save Donald Trump from impeachment and use me as a scapegoat. What he didn't realize was Donald Trump was not going to stop and was continue doing what he wanted to do. And that's why it blew up in Bill Barr's face. He also hired special counsel at the time, Brady, to look into Ukraine. When we tried to reach out with my attorney to special counsel Brady, he never returned our phone call. Nobody wanted to hear anything I had to say that had to do with Ukraine, Donald Trump, or Rudy Giuliani.
Mr. Chairman.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Parnas, I just want to say you have stuck to the facts today. We don't hear bombast and rhetoric from you, but you're telling a true story, and you've conducted yourself with great purpose and great dignity, and I know your son is here with you today, and I hope he and the rest of your family are proud of what you're doing for America. Yield back.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Donalds from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been an interesting hearing so far. Let's actually get to the actual paper trail of money flow from the CEFC into the bank account for President Joe Biden. And I want to start with a text message, July 31, WhatsApp text message between Hunter Biden and one Mr. Zhao. Real quick, Mr. Bobulinski, who is Mr. Zhao?
Congressman Donalds, I'd just actually like to spend 20 seconds. If you noticed, Congressman Khanna scurried out of here very quickly, and I'm actually disgusted as I sit here that he didn't address me based on the fact that I'm sitting here in front of the world trying to testify to the truth. In October 2020, I have messages I'm willing to produce to both the Democrats and the Republicans that Ro Khanna sent to me saying, you have always demonstrated to me that you're nothing but an honest with the highest integrity individual, and I was begging for him to go on CNN and tell the world in October 2020. I have extensive emails with Congressman Ro Khanna in 2021 and 2022 where I begged him and his staff to sit down with me and look at my BlackBerry phones that the Democrats are so focused on, to hire forensics experts and go through all of the factual information I had. So the fact that he did not even address me and then scurried out of here is disgusting to me.
All right.
Sorry, Mr. Donalds. I'll answer your question now.
All right, so we're going to have to come off of that because now we're at 3 minutes, 30 seconds.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I want to submit into the record 2 different WhatsApp text messages. One, July 31, between Hunter Biden and Mr. Zhao of CEFC, which stipulates that Hunter Biden wants to be able to move on from and get the contract resolved, get the deal resolved, and that Mr. Zhao responds and says, yes, the CEFC is willing to cooperate with the family. On August 31, there's another exchange, this time August 3rd, 2017, between Hunter Biden and Mr. Ganwei Dong. And in this message, they're talking about the stipulations of the arrangement between the Biden family and CEFC. I want to submit both WhatsApp text messages for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection to order.
Okay, now.
Spending package. I do. I mean, how are we banning UNRWA funding, which is aiding kids who are dying in Gaza? It's unconscionable. And I'm a no vote. I mean, look, you've got mothers holding their babies, seeing the color of their skin turn blue. And America has always stood for the dignity of every human being. We need to be providing aid there. Banning UNRWA funding is contributing to a famine. So I'm a no on that.
And did the White House cut a bad deal here?
It's not about politics. I mean, you see, kids are dying there. We should be providing aid. We should be providing funding. And I don't understand why you would have a ban for a year on UNRWA funding. I mean, talk to the head of UNRWA. He was denied entry into Gaza. He's screaming to the world that you're going to have a famine. And the United States Congress is saying we're not going to fund them? I mean, it's ridiculous.
One other thing, just about a political question, because you saw the president have all those uncommitted votes in Michigan. He's headed into Wisconsin, and there's going to be a similar dynamic there. How much unrest is there on the left side of the party in his handling over what's happening in Gaza?
I don't actually even think it's left or right. First, it's generational. There are people, younger voters, who care about our morality and want us to have moral leadership. And that means a permanent ceasefire and release of the hostages. But the most urgent thing is they see things like this, the ban on funding for dying kids. And they say, what world are we in? How out of touch is Washington? They see things like being the only country in the world vetoing resolution after resolution at the United Nations, with 14 other countries are calling for a permanent ceasefire. And they're upset. And they have a right to be upset. And you know what? It's our job to earn their trust, not our job to lecture them. Thank you.
Khanna is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Martell, I see that you worked at Dropbox and Lyft before your service to our country. Can you describe some of the collaboration with the Silicon Valley technology companies that you have and how that can improve?
We couldn't have done the job without tight partnership with key companies. Palantir is one, Anduril is another, Databricks is another. Almost everything we do, and then all of the cloud providers. So Google, Amazon, Oracle and Microsoft. Thank you, John.
Please keep listing companies in my district. No, that's just joking.
I think every Silicon Valley company's in your district, right, Chair? So we couldn't have done it without them. We spend a great deal of time talking to the leaders of those companies to get buy-in for the story that I'm telling you now. What I tried to do was take best practices from Silicon Valley, which is really the data is more important than the app. The data has to precede the app that's on top of it. It's not more important, but it has to precede. Quality data has to precede the apps that are on top of it. Quality data has to precede AI. It's logically inconsistent otherwise. And so I vetted this view with all of my colleagues in Silicon Valley. I had many conversations, not just with the big companies, but also with lots of startups to make sure that they were on board and that they would be willing to engage as we built out this multi-vendor, heterogeneous data integration layer that would allow for a separation from data from apps.
Thank you. Are there things we can do to improve the collaboration, or do you think it's in a pretty good place?
Well, I think we still have some work to tackle. I think DIU, the Defense Innovation Union, is doing a really good job at tackling those. Doug Beck is a really strong hire, and so I'm really glad he's on board. I've seen an increase in the way we've been interacting with small businesses, for example. Because of the marketplace we've built through Tradewinds, we're now up to 65 non-traditional company contracts. We're up to 75 small business contracts, and many of these are done in 30 to 60 days. So and that's because of the authorities that you all have given us. So we're seeing some growth, we're seeing some inertia increase, but we need that to continue. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway, and actually, if I'm candid, the thing that I feel best about is at the end of my tenure, people are demanding more of what we're trying to do, and faster. 100% agree, faster has to happen. 100% agree. But I think it's now clear what has to happen faster, which is getting the data right, having the data flow correctly, being able to integrate with companies as quickly as possible. And it shouldn't be something that we build. It has to be multi-vendor, heterogeneous.
Dr. Martell, I also see that you have a computer science PhD degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Now, many people rightfully have been concerned about anti-Semitism, and there's no place for that on college campuses, but some of the rhetoric in this building has gotten pretty excessive. One member of Congress said, I want to start defunding these universities and the rot in higher education. Could you talk about what it would mean for our national security and our ability to have a lead in AI if we just started defunding MIT, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, and many of these universities?
Thank you for that landmine question, Ranking Member Khanna. I think it's a tough call. The environment of a university, in order to be effective, has to allow for everyone to be able to think freely. But I do agree that if we don't continue to fund STEM the way we need to fund STEM, and continue to fund the technology in the way that we need to fund the technology at not just at top universities, but at all universities, then that's going to put us behind. So continuing to fund has to be the case.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
General Skinner, are you a gamer?
No, sir, I'm not.
Not nomadic?
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Khanna from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Califf, thank you for your service. So many Americans are frustrated that even with insurance, they're having to pay thousands of dollars for drugs for cancer, for multiple sclerosis, for getting inhalers, hundreds of dollars. I want you to help explain to the American people why this is happening, and to start by giving 2 sentences on what the FDA's Orange Book is.
Well, the Orange Book is a listing of patents that are relevant to drugs that are marketed.
Correct. And if something is listed on the Orange Book, is it correct that for 30 days, for 30 months, a generic manufacturer can't produce that?
That's with some caveats, but essentially that's a fair statement.
So let's take a couple examples. You have a multiple sclerosis drug, Copaxone, produced by Teva. It costs patients between $3,000 and $50,000, and it is currently listed on this Orange Book. Now, Teva, the company producing it, is going to come to, again, to have it listed with no real changes to the drug, cosmetic changes. If they list it again, then no generic manufactured drugs can be produced, correct, for 30 months?
It's a little more complicated than that. I mean, you left out one step before that, which is that you have to have a patent, which says it's a significant new thing.
But
our role in the Orange Book is ministerial. That is, we list the
but you have discretion of whether to list it or not, correct?
Not much discretion.
But technically you have that discretion.
Not really. We have to list them. And
What would happen if you didn't list them?
we'd get sued.
But what is happening is you have these companies that are getting you to list this and not have generic competition. And so then, as a result of it, the American people are paying $50,000 for drugs on multiple sclerosis, or in the case of Revlimid for leukemia, they're paying $17,000 because you're listing something in the FDA that isn't allowing generic competition. Now, you can say the blame is with the patent office, but if those were not listed at the FDA, you'd have generic alternatives. Is that not correct?
You know, my grandfather was a Baptist minister. We are all sinners, so we'll take our share of blame here. It's a point of emphasis between us and the patent office now to try to get rid of frivolous patents, which is what you're referring to. Frivolous patents just to extend the time period in which a company.
Would you say that in the case of Copaxone, where Teva is asking for more patents and multiple sclerosis patients are paying $3,000 to $50,000, that could be frivolous? Or with Revlimid, which is where they have 27 patents to treat leukemia, that there could be some of those being frivolous?
As FDA commissioner, that decision really is an FTC decision. I have personal opinions about parts of this.
What's your personal opinion on those two?
There are too many efforts made to extend patents, but I won't comment on the specific one.
But what about for AstraZeneca and the inhalers?
Well,
with Symbicort?
I can't refer to a specific one. I will note that my mom got some extra life expectancy due to Revlimid, and I'm very familiar with what happened with the cost.
And so my question, I guess, is what can we do in Congress? Because this is what's frustrating people. And I'm not blaming you, sir, but I'm saying that you've got a system where you're listing these drugs. Maybe you're saying your hands are tied. It's not bringing those costs down. And we keep getting, from the American people's perspective, how do we solve this? And if you could give me 10 seconds, I have one more question, but do you have a 10-second recommendation?
Maybe the analogy's worn out. Again, we're the referees, so it may be something where our staff will need to get together with yours and the patent office and see if there's anything that can be done to tighten up the laws here.
And the last question I want to ask, and it's not a gotcha or anything, because I know when you were in the FDA, then afterwards, you got consulting fees from Merck, AstraZeneca, Biogen. I take you at your word that there were ethics reviews, and then you said that there were no ethical conflicts. But one of the things I proposed is members of Congress should not become lobbyists. Would you commit today that after your service as FDA chair, you will not take any money as consulting fees from Big Pharma going forward?
I have a written record on this for 2 years. Beyond that point, you know, we'll have to see. I'll be 70.
Well, why not just make that commitment so that the American people have confidence that you won't take, you can make plenty of money at Google or somewhere else. Why not just say, I'm not going to take Big Pharma money?
I'm not looking to make money. I'm looking to contribute to the development of effective.
And why not say you won't take it after regulating it? Just make that commitment today.
I certainly have made the commitment for a period of time, but I can't speak for the rest of my life.
I think you should.
I appreciate your opinion.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Khanna from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor Snyder, thank you for your scholarship. Thank you for your very strong opening statement showing the links between China and Russia that many members of Congress are already praising. My friend Richard Levin would be proud of you having his professorship. But I want to ask you, just like you linked China and Russia, also about the Middle East. And the reality is that as we consider the security supplemental, these issues all have become interlinked. 56 members of Congress, including Speaker Pelosi and myself, wrote a letter to President Biden and Secretary Blinken asking them to stop any offensive weapons transfer to Israel. Do you agree with Speaker Pelosi, myself, and 56 members, especially given what you've written about Netanyahu, that this is not the time to provide offensive weapons?
I think that it's a mistake to believe that there's a military solution in Gaza, and that everything that can be gained in Gaza by military means was gained long ago, and that the administration should be using every possible leverage to secure a political solution, including and not limited to the recommendation that you make.
I appreciate that. A lot of my Democratic colleagues listen to you religiously, so I'm hoping they'll listen to you about this. One of the things some of us who've signed that letter have said is have a clean vote on Ukraine. I support it. Most people support it. I think you'd get a total Democratic caucus supporting it. And when it comes to the Israel aid, many of us would support the defensive aid. Some may not, but many would support Iron Dome and others. We just don't want the offensive weapons linked in that package. Do you agree that it makes sense to have separate votes on Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel?
I'm going to refer to Mr. Comer's, definition of the limits of my expertise. These are political matters on which you will have better judgment than I.
You have good judgment. I mean, what would you recommend?
I believe that it was politically understandable, but strategically erroneous from the beginning to link the Israel-Gaza conflict with the Russia-Ukraine war. They're two very different kinds of conflicts, and almost any attempt to bring the two of them together creates more friction and misunderstanding than anything else. So while I believe that Israel had to be supported after October 7th, after the horrifying terrorist attacks in Israel, it was a mistake politically, I believe, to link that to an event of an entirely different category, which is the largest land war in the world taking place, the largest land war in Europe since 1945, an encounter of two states, one of which has the second largest military in the world. These are two very different kinds of conflicts. The Israeli-Gaza conflict will hopefully be brought to a political solution this summer. The Russia-Ukraine war, on the other hand, is an interstate conflict which will be won or lost on the battlefield, and which requires an entirely different kind and a more serious kind of American engagement over the long run. So if you ask me as an American citizen and as an expert on the region, this is what I think. They're two very different kinds of conflict, and thus far, I believe politically, linking the two has made it harder rather than easier to pass support for Ukraine, and that has had terrifying costs. Not just on the Ukrainian battlefield where people are dying unnecessarily, and not just for Ukrainian civilians who are losing territory and as a result being killed or tortured, but also for our overall position in the world.
I really appreciate your saying that, because there are many of us, the minority in the Democratic caucus, but who have been making your point that let's not have a linkage of these two so that we can vote clearly for the Ukraine aid. Some of us are fine also providing defensive weapons, but don't want to just give a carte blanche to Netanyahu, which I think you have articulated here. I'm hopeful our leadership will listen to you. I'm hopeful Speaker Johnson will listen to you. And I think as much as those who praised your opening statement praise that, they should listen to your advice on this issue. I'll give you the last word.
Well, if I could have the last word. The point that I made earlier about the linkage between China's political warfare and Ukraine is very real. All of the Chinese messaging on this issue is on one side of this issue, all of it. And so if we're serious about resisting Chinese political warfare, passing aid for Ukraine this week would be a sign of that seriousness. Thank you.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Time's expired. Gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your service to our nation. President Sisi of Egypt has said that an invasion of Rafa would have catastrophic consequences both for the humanitarian situation and for broader regional peace and security. President Abbas has said, quote, "It would be the biggest catastrophe in the Palestinian people's history." And yet this morning I read that Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying, with or without a hostage deal, he plans to go in to Rafa. Mr. Secretary, we're the greatest nation in the world. We're the most powerful nation in the world. This is not a time for vague ambiguities. Will you please commit today and send a clear message to Mr. Netanyahu that he should not go in to Rafa?
What we have emphasized throughout is that they must do what's necessary to protect the civilians in the battle space. A much better job of what we've seen thus far. And as you know, there are north of 1 million civilians that have moved into that space that if you're going to conduct operations, then those civilians must be accounted for and hopefully moved out of the area. And certainly, if they were going to conduct operations, we want to see a different approach to those operations as well. But thus far, we've not seen the civilians moved out of the battle space. And again, what they have said is that their operations will be sequential, where they account for the civilians and move the civilians out of harm's way before they would.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary. Would you oppose it if you don't see a plan? If tomorrow he goes in without a plan, would you oppose that?
Of course I would. Yeah.
And would there be consequences in that case if Netanyahu goes in without a plan?
The consequences, of course, that would be determined by the president.
Would it be on the table to stop offensive weapons if he did that?
Again, that's determined by the president. So.
What would be your military advice if he did that?
I'll never share my military advice that I give to the president with anyone. So.
Let me ask this, though. You would certainly oppose it without a plan. Do you, in your years, and you know how much respect I have for you and your service, do you really believe that there is a conceivable plan of evacuation that would save civilian lives and allow Netanyahu to go into Rafa? Could you come up with such a plan?
I could, but it takes time, and of course we see some signs that they are moving towards that direction, but in terms of all of the things that need to take place before an attack happens, we've not seen a number of things that we believe that will have to happen before.
What are those things that you think need to happen in terms of a plan that would give you confidence that civilian lives would be protected?
And they have a plan. The question is, can you execute? Are you executing the plan, and how much time are you allocating for it?
What are the main concerns you have of what you've, either the lack of plan or lack of execution?
Lack of execution.
And what would be the specifics of what you would want to see that they're not doing today?
Making provisions for the civilians wherever you direct them to. Do you have sustainment in that area? Do you have the ability to move them from where they are now to wherever you're going to direct them to? And then are you willing to protect them as you do that? So, the housing, the medical care, all that stuff that needs to be in place. We've seen some signs that some of that's coming together, but clearly not.
And where would they move these million people to? So you're saying before they go into Rafah, they would need to move all the million people out of Rafah who are civilians?
I doubt that they'll move all of them out, but certainly the preponderance of the people, sure. And they can only go north.
Because my time's is almost expired. If there are 300,000 left, I mean, do you have a sense if they were to go in, how many deaths, civilian deaths, we're talking about? Or, I mean, if they were to go in?
Well, there have been far too many deaths, civilian deaths already, and we certainly, if they were to go in, we certainly would want to see things done in a much different way. And the number of civilian deaths would depend upon what they're doing and how they're doing it. But again, the two things aren't.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today, Senator Bernie Sanders and I introduced a historic bill to eliminate medical debt for every American. Over 100 million Americans have medical debt. That is criminal in a country as wealthy as ours. No American should go into debt because they go to the ER or because they go to a doctor. Our bill eliminates all medical debt for families. It eliminates the credit card damaging reports on medical debt. And it stops hospitals for sticking debt collectors on vulnerable patients. Can we not agree in America no one should have to give up their dream of owning a home because they have medical debt? No one should have to create GoFundMe pages to get medical attention. No one should have to decide between curing cancer and medical bankruptcy. This bill stands up for every American's right to health care. Thank you to Senator Merkley and Representative Rashida Tlaib for co-leading this effort. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to sound the alarm on the housing crisis in the United States of America. Over half of U.S. renters are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And we have over 650,000 who are unhoused. Here's what we need to do. Stop Wall Street from buying up single-family homes. I have a bill to end the corporate subsidies. Second, cap rent so it doesn't go higher than inflation. The president can do this because many corporate landlords are reliant on financing from our federal agencies. Third, let's make sure that we build 7 million in new affordable housing units. And finally, let's make sure that those with prior criminal records aren't banned from public housing and we have a tenant's bill of rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields for what? California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Ranking Member Smith for his leadership. I also want to thank Chair Rogers for the fair way he conducts the committee. We should be debating how much money to spend on defense and whether we're getting our money's worth. It's no secret that I believe it should be a lower number, but I recognize that that's a valid debate that this committee should have. What I don't understand is some of the amendments that have nothing to do with defense that are being introduced into this bill. Amendment 55, for example, prohibits the Defense Department from paying for the sick leave or travel for service members receiving an abortion. Amendment 51 prohibits the DoD from using masks to combat a pandemic. Amendment 49 prohibits the Defense Department from providing or approving pride flags. Amendment 47 prohibits even the teaching of affirmative action. Now, this one you wonder, what does this have to do with defense policy or keeping our country safe? Amendment 22 prohibits the DoD from buying electric vehicles or chargers. Talk about big government being prescriptive. Amendment 44 directs the Confederate Memorial to return to the Arlington National Cemetery. Mr. Speaker, my hope is that this committee could debate the top line of defense and what we need to do to keep our country safe, and that we not bring these cultural divisive issues into supporting our troops and into keeping America the strongest country in the world. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to
yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Khanna from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Berry, you're the co-author.
Okay, right. Mr. Khanna, I'm sorry, Mr. Khanna.
Mr. Berry, you're the co-author of Project 2025, the labor section. Am I correct?
The lead author on that section, correct.
Go down this list.
I want to get some facts out. There's been so much conversation about who's for working families and what we're going to do for the working class. I just want to get some facts out. In that report, you call for the repeal of Davis-Bacon and say that Congress should enact a law that makes it illegal to pay prevailing wage for union employees. Is that correct?
I appreciate the chance to correct the record. That is actually not correct. The draft, the chapter expresses no view. There is an alternative view, not attributable.
So you don't think there should be a repeal of Davis-Bacon?
The chapter does not take a position.
Do you have a view of whether there should be a repeal?
Honestly, I think it's complicated, and I don't.
Okay.
I don't
Do you? In the chapter, it says that you should end project labor agreements and project labor requirements. Is that correct?
Same issue, Congressman.
Yeah, you don't agree with that, or you say that the report doesn't call for that?
The chapter does not speak to the issue directly. There's a dissent that does. I don't take a position.
What about the rescinding of regulation prohibiting the discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics? Do you believe that we should be repealing any regulations to prevent discrimination on that?
I'm blanking on exactly which regs we're talking about, but yes, I support what is in there on those issues. Yes.
So you would, just to be clear, you would repeal any regulations that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics.
The position is that Bostock should be read properly, narrowly, and not extended to the biological areas like bathrooms that we've been discussing today.
But that's not what the report says. The report says basically you don't want any regulations that prevent discrimination against gay people and people based on sexual orientation or gender identity. I mean, that's what you call for in the report.
No, the chapter accepts Bostock according to its terms, but resists its extension to areas where it doesn't apply.
I'm just quoting directly. It says, rescind regulations prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. I mean, do you stand by that statement?
I stand by what it says in the chapter, yes.
So just to be clear, I mean, that basically means you don't believe that we need to have laws to protect people from discrimination. If someone is gay or someone is transgender, you think that there should not be laws to protect them. Let me go on to one other issue in this report. You say that we need to be scheduling civil employees as F-scheduled employees, which means that the president would have the authority to fire about 50,000 civilian employees if she or he wants to. Is that correct?
Someone else said responsibility. I do support that as a policy matter, that ultimately the president and people accountable to the president should be the ones setting our executive branch policy.
So, I mean, under this scenario, if for example, if President Trump returns to office, he would be able to fire about 50,000 people who are currently civil servants and bring in people who are more consistent with his ideology, and you're recommending this as a policy, correct?
Having more political accountability is a very good thing.
I just want to know, I'm not trying to argue with you, I'm saying for a fact, so you support the idea that Donald Trump could come in, hypothetically, if he wins the election, fire 50,000 civil employees and replace them with people who support his ideology?
I support the Schedule F idea, yes.
And that means that if he wants to take civil servants from the Justice Department, State Department, and from the Department of Homeland Security, and he says they aren't sufficiently for MAGA, I want to fire these folks, 50,000 of them, and replace them with people more aligned with MAGA, he would have the ability to do that. Currently, there are only 4,000 political appointees. You want him to have the authority, if he wins the election, to have 50,000 people replaced, correct?
It's a lesser civil service regime. It's not the same as political appointees, but political policy responsiveness is appropriate when it comes to any employee who touches on public policy, which the Schedule F class would.
I'm directionally correct. I mean, I think the American people should decide whether they want that or not. You're basically saying he should have the ability to fire up to 50,000 people if they're not doing what his ideology is, and replace them with people more consistent with his ideology, and reclassify these folks as Schedule F, correct?
100%.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I would like to go to Mr. Mfume, but they tell me I have to call on Mr. Goldman next. So, Chair recognizes Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been interesting
for convening this hearing on a bipartisan basis. I joined them in condemning the horrific assassination attempt on the former president. I am relieved for the sake of the country that he wasn't seriously hurt and that he survived, and my thoughts with him and his family during such a traumatic event. I also want to express condolences to Corey Comprator's family and recognize his heroism in saving his daughter's lives, and to the victims of that awful event. Now, Director Cheadle, would you agree that this is the most serious security lapse since President Reagan was shot in 1981 of the Secret Service?
Yes, sir, I would.
And, you know, do you know what Stuart Knight did when he was in charge at the time of the Secret Service? Do you know what he did afterwards?
He remained on duty.
He resigned. He resigned. And Stuart Knight was not a Democratic appointee or a Republican appointee. Look, I'm not questioning your judgment. I just don't think this is partisan. If you have an assassination attempt on a president, a former president, or a candidate, you need to resign. That's what Stuart Knight did. He was a Republican appointee, and he took responsibility. And I think you need to reflect. This is not a question of you. It's a question of the American people. You cannot go leading a Secret Service agency when there is an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. I would say that about anyone who is running. And so I guess my question to you is, what's the difference between your position and what Stuart Knight did?
What I will tell you, sir, is that I am dedicated to finding the answers to what happened. And like every Secret Service agent, we don't shirk from our responsibilities. I will remain on and be responsible to the agency, to this committee, to the former president, and to the American public.
But is there a reason you wouldn't just do what Stuart Knight did after the Reagan assassination attempt?
I believe that I provided an answer.
There's nothing more that you have to say? I mean, do you really believe at this moment, given how divided the country is and the questions asked, that your service in this role is the best for the nation? I mean, I'm not saying you can't do public service again, you can't do something else again. Do you really genuinely in your heart believe that you being in this role is what's right for America at this moment? I mean, do you think there are people who are Trump supporters who have confidence in you? The one thing that we've got to have agencies in this country that are transcend politics, that have the confidence of independents, Democrats, Republicans, progressives, conservatives. Do you really believe that the majority of this country has confidence in you right now?
I believe that the country deserves answers, and I am committed to finding those answers and providing those answers.
Well, look, I believe, Director Cheadle, that you should resign. I think there are colleagues on both sides of the aisle who believe that, and I hope you'll consider it. I yield back.
Fighter in Congress. I'm talking about no other than California Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you. What an exciting call. I hear over 100,000 people. That's an incredible job you've done in organizing and getting so many progressive stalwarts on. I was just in Reno, Nevada for Vice President Harris, and it was electric. Over 100 people showed up in a small place to knock on doors, volunteer, and that was 3 times that were showing up earlier. So the energy is there. I just think we need to mobilize our progressive movement to run on a clear working class agenda, strengthening Social Security, making sure we're expanding Medicare to dental, vision, and hearing, having a living wage, making sure that we're ending medical debt, making sure that we're making public college tuition free. These are the policies that are going to speak to the working and the middle class, and they're exceedingly popular. And when we run on a progressive economic vision, a vision to empower the working and middle class, recognizing that they're still hurting with high rents, to cap rents. I mean, I heard that all over Nevada, the rents are too high. We want to cap these rents for landlords, but we need to make the economic case. We need to make the case that we're the party of peace. I mean, Lindsey Graham is talking about going to war in Iran. No war in Iran. I'm going to be introducing legislation and working with others to stop the madness of us getting into a Middle East war. And we need a ceasefire and a release of the hostages, and we need to stop sending offensive weapons to Netanyahu. So we need to campaign with our values, our progressive values front and center on peace, on human rights, on a bold economic vision. These are popular policies. These are what the country wants. And when we do that, we will elect Vice President Harris as president and usher in a bold progressive era. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for organizing. Let's go win.
Let's go win. That's right. Thank you so much, Congressman. Next up, we have a local fighter in Wisconsin. I'm talking about no other than Minority Leader, Wisconsin State Assembly Member Greta.
Representative Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Puglisi, I was very surprised to learn that Georgetown was not paying for your defense. And I'm going to be seeing John Levin at Stanford, who's going to be the new president. He was the chair of the economics department when I taught there. Next week, he's getting inaugurated. But I guess my question to you is, what can Stanford do, or what can Georgetown do to protect your right to write? I don't just view this as a China issue. I view this as a freedom of speech issue.
Thank you for the question. I believe, to hold up the indemnity clause would be a good start.
Have you contacted through Congress, Georgetown? If not, I'm happy if you want to talk offline and to reach out to Georgetown, and I'm sure other members would as well. I mean, I think if you wrote this paper while you were at Georgetown, I mean, people are free to disagree with it. People are free to criticize it. But to sue you for an academic paper, that's just not how we do things in the United States of America.
Yes, thank you. I believe the committee has sent a letter, but I appreciate the support.
Right. Well, I'm fairly involved there as well, so why don't you afterwards, if you want to just contact our office, and we'll send something over as well, because hopefully Georgetown will set the right precedent here. I mean, there are broader policy issues, but I think our universities have to be at the front line of protecting our researchers and our scholars. From everything I can tell from your paper, it was simply an academic work, and that's how the marketplace of ideas work. If they think you're wrong, they could publish 5 things saying you're wrong. But to sue you is absurd. And so I appreciate your coming before the committee and sharing your story. Dr. Goldenziel, let me ask you, we recently unanimously in the House passed a bill to restrict DJI's drone technology. I was shocked to learn, I think it was Representative Stefanik's bill, I was shocked to learn that we are so dependent on this Chinese drone company where they're providing all of the emergency service drones. They're providing drones, some of them even to our military, and I'm hopeful that this bill that passed unanimously in the House or by voice vote is going to be part of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization. But how did we get in this position where we're dependent on Chinese drone companies? You know, Chairman Rogers from HASC was just out with me in my district and did a hearing in Silicon Valley. We've got so many great drone technology companies here. How did we end up in this position, and how do we correct it?
Thank you for that question. While I'm not an expert in this matter, I can say that this conversation has been going on for a very long time. My former colleague, Harry Wingo, who's now recently left NDU to become our Deputy National Cyber Director, testified before Congress about this issue several years ago, and this conversation has been going on as long as I've been part of the Department of Defense, almost 9 years now. So I think that this is a remnant of our just overall economic engagement with China that, of course, we are now decoupling from. My question would be why it took so long for us to address this issue.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, obviously, it was a failure that we had allowed ourselves to become this dependent. And I don't want to sound alarmist, but you saw what happened with
Hezbollah and and Israel and the sensitivity of technology. I mean, why we would allow Chinese technology in our most sensitive areas just seems very naive. And I'd love to hear your thoughts just more generally on what we can do to ensure that we're supporting our own industrial base for this sensitive technology.
I think one of the things that Congress can do is really to examine our supply chains. I know there's concern within the Department of Defense, not speaking on their behalf, about our processes for government contracts not being sophisticated enough to be able to weed out Chinese companies, subsidiaries, infiltrating our technological chains in a way that can, technological supply chains in a way that could come back to bite us. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize Mr. Khanna from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gunasekawa, you're the former EPA Chief of Staff in the Trump administration, and my understanding is you authored the Project 2025 chapter on the EPA. Do you still support Project 2025's proposal to reinstate Schedule F, which would lead to the firing of 50,000 expert civil servants?
Absolutely. And I think there's more quote-unquote civil servants that should be gone because the growth of the federal bureaucracy actually gets in the way of agencies fulfilling important missions like protecting public health and the environment.
And do you have an interest in serving in a future Trump administration should he win?
I do not.
Do you believe that the president should, if Trump wins, that he should implement the Project 2025 recommendation of firing these civil servants?
I think it's the president's prerogative to determine what policies he ultimately wants to implement.
What would your recommendation be?
There's a lot of recommendations that I would suggest that the president embrace from an overarching governance perspective.
Would that include the firing of the 50,000 civil servants, the Schedule F?
Yeah, I actually have a book coming out called Y'all Fired, A Southern Belle's Guide to Restoring Federalism and Draining the Swamp, and I go step by step of what I would suggest the president do to actually right-size the federal government.
Is it fair to say that there are other people who share your view who will be in his administration?
There's a lot of people in the conservative movement that share this view, and there's a lot of Americans.
And will some of them be in the administration? I mean, I have no problem in terms of the transparency. I just think the American people should know what their choice is. And my understanding is that your view is that we should fire these civil servants for whatever reasons. I haven't read your book. Maybe I will. And there are other people in the conservative movement who want to do that. And if Trump wins, you believe they should help implement that, correct?
I don't know who the president plans to hire for various positions. I know when he's ready to announce that, he will.
But certainly it's reasonable to assume some of these people would be in the administration pushing this view of bureaucratic reform, as you put it.
Yeah, bureaucratic reform is very.
And that includes firing these 50,000 civil servants.
Again, I would suggest more than 50,000, but there's a lot within the conservative movement that believe, and a lot of the American electorate that actually believe the growth of the federal bureaucracy.
I appreciate your perspective. I just want to make sure that people, because Donald Trump is saying, oh, I don't know anything about Project 2025. You should just say, yes, we're going to fire 50,000 civil servants like you've been honest about. I respect that, so that the American people can see if that's what they really want.
Mr. Khanna,
let me just go to Mr. Carr.
I would just say Schedule F, the policy existed well before the most recent iteration of the mandate for leadership.
Mr. Carr, you didn't answer Mr. Raskin's simple question on ABC and revoking the license. I don't need to know whether you make the same decisions with Democrats or Republicans. I just want to know simply, do you think, based on the ABC debate, in your role as a former FCC commissioner, and do you think that that is grounds for revoking the license for ABC?
Thank you. What I've said is consistent with what I've said for the past 6 years, which is every single decision, including in the licensing context, is one that I'll make based on the facts, the record.
So what is
with the First Amendment.
The whole country has the facts. We all saw the debate. I mean, it's not like some complicated question. Based on those facts, based on what David Muir did, based on the questions that were asked, would you recommend that the license be revoked? I mean, President Trump obviously has an opinion on it. He's made it. What's your opinion?
Look, I think I've been pretty clear. Again, I've been nominated by both President Biden and
that's not answering the question. That's not answering the question.
I mean, I've been asked different versions.
You know, I'm not
of
trying to be a debate moderator, but it's a simple. That answer would never fly in a debate. I mean, come on. It's a simple question. Do you agree with President Trump's opinion that? Look, at least I respect that Trump has an opinion. Just give us your opinion, yes or no.
My opinion is that the FCC in every single case has to apply the law consistent with the First Amendment.
And I'm saying, how would you apply it here? If Trump looked at the debate, he said the debate was unfair. He says that one thing that people respect about him, he says what he believes. You're sitting here and not giving us an opinion. Just say, yes, I agree with President Trump, or no, I disagree with it. This is what people, they hate the obfuscation. Just take a stand. How hard is it?
My position is clear. What you're raising are concerns about weaponization. I think that's important that we talk about that. When there's a license transfer of radio stations...
This is a bunch of gobbledygook.
Let the witness answer the question, please.
I'll give you an actual case. A license transfer in South Florida to a group that people believed were conservative purchasers. Democrats said the FCC should block it because the election depended on it.
But my question is very simple. Based on the debate, and
You've
based
had
on what
Democrats in Congress
do you
who
think
wrote letters to cable companies telling them they should drop Fox News
because
of
let me
the
try one last time.
that the newsroom made.
Based on the debate, did you think that the questions were unfair or rigged in a way that calls for ABC's license to be revoked? The way President Trump has been very clear. I respect, he's very clear on his view. Do you agree or disagree with his view? It's a yes or no.
Gosh, I think my position has been very clear going back to 2017 as a commissioner.
Gentleman's time's expired, but please feel free to answer the question.
2012, I've maintained a very consistent issue. But if your concern is weaponization, we should talk about that. When President Biden stood at the White House podium and said Elon Musk is worth being looked at, and then all of a sudden, the FCC abruptly reverses a 2020 decision to get him $885 million to bring broadband to 640,000 people. I think that's concerning. When Democrats in Congress write letters to cable companies asking them to drop Fox News because of the decisions, I think that's concerning. And so I think you've seen from my record a consistent pattern of always basing my decisions at the FCC based on the law, the facts, and the First Amendment. That's what I've done. That's what I'll always do.
Very good. Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Khanna, our friend from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Winfrey, as you've said to Representative Stansbury and many others, you authored the Federal Reserve chapter of Project 2025. Now, in 2016, you were on President Trump's transition team, correct?
That's right.
And do you have any role in his transition team now?
I do not.
In the Project 2025 Federal Reserve chapter, you recommend that we eliminate the dual mandate for the Fed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you still recommend that if President Trump wins, he do that?
I would recommend that.
And to explain that...
It would actually require action from Congress.
But you would recommend that he pursue that policy. And to explain that, that basically means right now the Fed has a mandate to lower inflation and also to have full employment. You think that what the Fed should do is just focus on lowering inflation. In other words, would you recommend then that Chairman Powell should be raising interest rates until inflation comes to 2%?
I don't have any insight into the data that the Federal Reserve has they're using to make their decision.
If you were to eliminate the dual mandate,
correct.
Do you have a view of what the inflation target should be?
So I think it should be about 2%.
And so wouldn't
as it has been historically.
Wouldn't the natural course be that the Fed would have to raise interest rates until they hit the 2% mandate if that's the policy and if they aren't considering employment?
That's correct, but let's take a step back. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate. Other large central banks like the European Central Bank and the Bank of England do not. They have a single mandate, price stability.
Sure, but under your
because
proposal,
because
which
it's something they can actually control.
I just want to be clear. What you're saying is a future Trump presidency, if he took your recommendations, would mean higher interest rates. I mean, you would have the Fed under an elimination of the dual mandate basically raising rates, meaning, if I could finish, meaning that the stock market is going to go down with the rates being raised, meaning that we're going to have a problem with unemployment if the rates keep going up, because you're basically saying that the Fed has to be singularly focused on 2%. Am I misinterpreting what you're saying?
The Federal Reserve is an independent central bank, right? That has a mandate, a dual mandate from Congress. Congress would have to change that.
But
the president has...
The whole point is you want it changed. You want it changed and you want Trump to change it. You were on the transition team. You've written a whole paper on it. I don't understand.
Yeah,
It's a defensible position. I mean, I think Milton Friedman, others would want it, but the American people should know the consequences. I mean, what you're advocating is Volcker-like policies, but at a time where we have 2.8% or 2.3% inflation. And what you're under your proposal, and if Trump comes and listens to you, what that would mean is higher interest rates for the American people until we got to 2% interest, right? Isn't that correct?
And what happened after Volcker was the Fed chair?
I think Volcker did a great job at the time, but that
Exactly.
was at 13%. But what you're saying is we got to swallow that medicine today, and you want higher interest rates in a Trump administration. Now, Mr. DeVore, thank you for your service. You know, they say it's statistics, lies, damn lies and statistics, but I'm going to throw out two of them because you have so many statistics. Do you happen to know the GDP of California compared to Texas?
Well, of course, California is 60% larger, so the GDP is going to be larger than
Do you
Texas.
happen to know the per capita GDP difference?
It's also higher because of the area that you represent, sir, Silicon Valley. Absolutely. Chips are more expensive than oil.
Do you happen to know the real wage differential between California and Texas?
And it's marginally higher in California, although your Gini coefficient is higher than in Texas. So you have greater wage inequality in California than in Texas because we manufacture more than California does.
We could, it's 75,000 to 62,000, but why not just say they're two great states that help contribute to America's economic growth?
That's right. 1 in 4 Americans come from those two great states, sir.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes